It was August 1962. Inside her home in Los Angeles, Marilyn Monroe was found dead in her bedroom. She was 36 years old, and only a few months earlier, she had stood in front of thousands of people at Madison Square Garden and sung Happy Birthday to President John F. Kennedy. By morning, reporters were gathering outside her house, and the news was spreading across the world. The official investigation would conclude that Marilyn died from an overdose of barbiturates and rule her death as taking her own life. In the decades that followed, people would question that conclusion again and again. But the strangest part of Marilyn Monroe's story isn't where it ended. It's how unlikely the entire thing was in the first place. 17 years before her death, she wasn't an actress, wasn't famous, and wasn't even called Marilyn Monroe. She was Norma Jeane, a 19-year-old working in a factory during the Second World War. Norma Jeane had been born in Los Angeles in 1926, but her childhood was far from stable. Her mother struggled with serious mental illness and could not consistently care for her, so Norma Jeane spent time with foster families and in an orphanage. At 16, she married James Dougherty, and a few years later, while he was away with a merchant marine, she took a factory job. That job changed her life for a reason nobody could have planned. In 1945, photographer David Conover visited the factory to photograph women working during the war. Norma Jeane happened to be there, and Conover noticed how naturally she appeared in photographs. Soon she was modeling, appearing in magazines, and changing her brown hair to blonde. Within a year, 20th Century Fox had signed her. Hollywood changed one more thing: her name. Studio executive Ben Lyon suggested Marilyn, and she chose Monroe from her mother's family. Norma Jeane became Marilyn Monroe in 1946, although becoming a star would take considerably longer. Fox eventually dropped her first contract, and for a while there was every possibility that Marilyn Monroe would simply become one more forgotten Hollywood hopeful. She didn't. Small roles eventually brought attention, and by 1953, Marilyn had reached Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. The pink dress, the diamonds, and her performance of Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend helped create the version of Marilyn that became famous around the world. Yet there was a strange difference between how valuable she looked and how much power she actually had. Marilyn was reportedly paid around $15,000 for the film, while Jane Russell received around $150,000. Her private life was becoming public entertainment at the same time. In January 1954, Marilyn married baseball legend Joe DiMaggio, and photographers followed the couple everywhere. The marriage lasted only 9 months, and one of Marilyn's most famous moments happened near its end. While filming The 7-Year Itch in New York, Marilyn stood above a subway grate as air lifted her white dress. Hundreds of people had gathered around the set, photographers were taking pictures, and Marilyn repeatedly performed the scene for the cameras. DiMaggio reportedly hated the spectacle. The marriage already had serious problems, but within weeks, Marilyn filed for divorce. For the public, the night produced one of the most famous photographs of Marilyn Monroe. For Marilyn, it came during the collapse of her marriage. And by then, another problem was becoming impossible to ignore. Hollywood loved Marilyn Monroe, but it loved a very specific Marilyn: beautiful, blonde, funny, and usually not very clever. Those roles had made her famous, but Marilyn wanted to prove she could do more. So at the height of her career, she left Hollywood. Marilyn left Los Angeles for New York. It was a risky move. Fox had helped turn her into a star, and walking away from the studio could have damaged the career she had spent years building. But Marilyn was frustrated with her contract, her pay, and the roles she kept being offered. If Hollywood would only see her as the blonde on the poster, she would have to prove there was more to her somewhere else. In New York, she began studying acting seriously. She worked with Lee Strasberg and attended the Actors Studio, surrounded by actors who treated acting as a craft rather than simply entertainment. Marilyn also read widely and wanted to improve. It was very different from the image audiences knew from her movies, and she seemed determined to change the way the industry saw her. Then she made a decision that gave Fox a much bigger problem than an actress refusing a role. In 1955, Marilyn and photographer Milton Green formed Marilyn Monroe Productions. Instead of waiting for a studio to decide her future, she was trying to gain control over it herself. Fox eventually negotiated a new contract with her, giving Marilyn better terms and more influence over her work. She returned to the screen in Bus Stop in 1956, playing a character that gave her more to do than simply look glamorous. Critics responded well to her performance. For the moment, leaving Hollywood seemed to have worked. Her personal life was changing too. That same year, Marilyn married Arthur Miller, the playwright behind Death of a Salesman. The relationship fascinated the press. Marilyn was one of the most photographed women in the world, while Miller was known as a serious intellectual and writer. To outsiders, they seemed like an unlikely pair, but Marilyn was entering a period when she wanted more than the life Hollywood had designed for her. The next few years were much less simple. Marilyn wanted children, but she experienced pregnancy losses. She struggled with insomnia and other health problems, and medication became increasingly important in her daily life. These problems did not stay outside the studio. She began arriving late, missing work, and sometimes struggling to get through scenes. Then came Some Like It Hot. Making the film was difficult. Marilyn sometimes forgot lines, filming could require many takes, and director Billy Wilder became frustrated with the delays. From the outside, it could look as though the actress who had fought so hard to be taken seriously was making her own career harder. Then audiences saw the movie. Some Like It Hot became a major success, and Marilyn's performance as Sugar Cane became one of the most celebrated of her career. She won a Golden Globe for it. The problems on set had been real, but so was the result. When the finished film reached audiences, Marilyn could still make all that trouble seem invisible. That success bought her time, but it did not solve what was happening away from the screen. Her marriage to Arthur Miller was deteriorating, and her health continued to cause problems. Miller wrote The Misfits, in which Marilyn starred alongside Clark Gable. It was the kind of serious dramatic work she had wanted for years, but the production was difficult, and Marilyn and Miller divorced around the time the film was released in 1961. A year later, Marilyn returned to Fox for Something's Got to Give. This was the same studio she had challenged years earlier, and eventually forced to offer her a better deal. This time, however, the balance had changed. Marilyn was frequently ill and missed several days of filming. The production fell behind, costs increased, and Fox eventually fired her. For Marilyn, it was an extraordinary reversal. She had once walked away from Fox because she wanted more control over her career. Now, Fox had decided it could no longer continue a film with her. But anyone looking at Marilyn's public life in May 1962 might never have guessed how uncertain her career had become. On May 19, Madison Square Garden was filled with people celebrating President John F. Kennedy's birthday. Marilyn was scheduled to perform, and when she finally appeared, she was wearing a sparkling dress covered with crystals. She stepped toward the microphone and began singing Happy Birthday in the breathy voice audiences immediately recognized. The performance lasted only a few minutes, but it became one of the most famous appearances of her life. Here was an actress whose latest movie was falling apart, standing in front of thousands of people and reminding everyone that she could still command a room almost instantly. And despite being fired, Marilyn's relationship with Fox was not necessarily finished. There were discussions about restarting Something's Got to Give with her. She was still being photographed and interviewed, and there were possible projects ahead. Her career was troubled, but there was no clear reason for the public to think they had seen the last of Marilyn Monroe. Less than 3 months after the Kennedy performance, on August 5, Marilyn was found dead at her home in Los Angeles. The official investigation concluded that she had died from an overdose of substance. She was 36 years old. Her death immediately attracted the same kind of attention that had followed her life, only now every detail of her final hours seemed important. Marilyn had known actors, studio executives, and politicians, and her connection to President Kennedy became especially interesting to the public. After Marilyn's death, many questions remained. There were theories about the Kennedys, secret information, and even a possible cover-up, but none were ever proven. 3 days later, Marilyn was laid to rest in a private funeral. Joe DiMaggio, her former husband, helped arrange it. Her final movie, Something's Got to Give, was never completed. The footage still exists where we see Marilyn smiling, acting, standing in front of the camera, with where she had no idea that these would be some of her final scenes. And just like that, a life that had changed so quickly was over. In 1945, she was Norma Jeane, a 19-year-old factory worker. A photographer noticed her, and within a year, she had a Hollywood contract and a new name. In 1962, the cameras stopped rolling, but the world never stopped watching Marilyn Monroe. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the story of Marilyn Monroe and learned something new along the way. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to Storyverse English, where we learn English through some of the world's greatest stories. See you in the next story.